Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'm a marketing specialist here at Educate 360. Welcome to today's webinar, 9 Benefits of a Hybrid Cloud Strategy, presented by our expert technical instructor today, Eric Bland. We are going to be in Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use the chat or the Q&A option for our short Q&A portion after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. I will now hand it over to you, Eric.
All right, thanks a lot, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are exactly. It's still morning here. My name is Eric Bland. Let me just throw out a little information about me because it'll help you understand where I'm coming from. I'm senior technical trainer here at New Horizons. I live and work out of our New Orleans office. I've been in IT for way far more longer than I care to admit, and I've been a MCT. I'm hitting my 20th year as a trainer. Now you can see by the certifications that I've listed down there, my main focus has been on the Microsoft side of things, although I'm familiar with AWS and Google Cloud. Most of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to illustrate in terms of Microsoft technology because that's where I'm the most comfortable. But a lot of this information equally applies to AWS, Google Cloud, the other clouds that are out there also. But you're going to see there's a bit of a flavoring of Microsoft technology in here just because that's my background. All right, so the first question we need to tackle is, what the heck is hybrid cloud? Now, the basic definition of that is when you're combining your existing on-premises data center with resources up in the cloud. Now, ultimately, all of the cloud service providers, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they would prefer, of course, they would prefer that you transition into using the cloud. In fact, Microsoft has been promoting to small businesses, you don't need any servers on premises anymore. What you can use is Entra ID, which used to be called Azure Active Directory, as your directory service, and then implement all of the services that you need directly in the cloud service or use something like Microsoft 365. Same thing with the other cloud providers. You should think about at some point transitioning totally into the cloud. But there may be reasons why you can't or you don't want to do that. And then what you should look at is there an opportunity to implement some features in the cloud while keeping some features internally? Typically, what we see is compliance problems crop up. If you're implementing things in the public cloud, in any of the public clouds, then you are losing a measure of control over your data, over your information, because the physical environment is now owned by that cloud service provider, not by you. And you're reliant on them to meet all of the standards that you must meet, in addition to certifying that you're still meeting those standards. So a lot of times we implement a phase of networking where we're keeping some of our information in-house, but we're displaying that information or we're making it available through components that are running in the cloud, because the cloud may give us an opportunity to have better performance or better availability, but yet I can retain the information that I need to protect in my internal environment. Now, actually, I've gone past the basic definition and into some of the reasoning and actually some of the benefits of doing hybrid. And that is you can choose to run your services internally where you're doing them now in all likelihood, but you can also choose to implement some of those services in the cloud where it might be cheaper or better. Now, the term hybrid cloud has also been extended a little bit recently to go to include the term multi-cloud. In fact, we saw this with the US DoD, where they went to the cloud providers and said, look, we want you all to bid against each other for hosting Department of Defense services in your cloud. And they all came back to the DoD and said, wait a minute, that's a mistake. We all have problems from time to time. What you really want to do is get a bid for sharing services across the different big cloud providers. That way, if there's a problem with one, if there's an attack on one, and there's a reduction in performance, you could shift resources over to another one. So hybrid cloud initially was defined as being, I have some components of a service that I want to keep in-house and some components that I want to run in a public cloud to take advantage of some of the advantages there. But now it's also been extended to include not just that, but also, is just one cloud provider the only answer? So providing or implementing a multi-cloud solution may be your ultimate answer. In fact, in the past, and not that long ago, um, we see where Microsoft will literally have a sale on some of their services where they're duking it out with AWS, or AWS will have a sale. They'll match the price of Azure, or Azure will match the price of AWS. So actually, in multi-cloud, you can use some of that competition to save some money if you have a way to easily transition from one to the other. And actually, we're going to talk about some of the products that are available that help you do that. Well, number one of the advantages of hybrid cloud could be making things more efficient. You've got you would have to create some management mechanism for Microsoft. Microsoft recognizes that you're going to be managing, at least for the initial stages, you're going to be managing resources both in Azure and on premises. And again, as things have evolved, now you may be managing things in other cloud services like AWS and Google. So Microsoft has a product that they call Azure Arc, which allows you to have a single management pane that can manage resources on premises, in Azure's cloud, as well as in AWS and Google Cloud. And actually, it has a potential to extend beyond that. It can manage virtual machines from one place. It can manage Kubernetes clusters, which is probably the biggest or the easiest solution that makes the most sense in a multi-cloud situation. In addition to providing for management in a more efficient way. By the way, one of the other advantages that you get when you move to a cloud is, I before I was a trainer, I ran a small business IT department. That was my job. I worked my way up from being help desk. And of course, when the cloud services came out, that was, hallelujah. I've been busy struggling to keep a tiny, tiny data center, and you could call it a data closet, populated with proper machines, and having to learn how to do everything. It was such a great idea to see and a seasoned large company that been through all of the things that I was experiencing through the years. They've already been through it. They've already thought it through. They've already come up with their own solutions for it. And they're implementing those solutions in their in their cloud service, and then making it available to me. For instance, running your email server was always a huge undertaking. Well, once BPOS was the original version, of course, now it's Microsoft 365 came out, just let Microsoft run that server for you. But that's also true in Azure, and again in AWS and Google Cloud. There are services that are already set up for you where you can concentrate on your data or your applications and not so much on the infrastructure. If I need a database, I can still set up a virtual machine in Azure and install SQL Server or one of the other. You can even set up Oracle on a virtual machine in there inside of Azure and in some of the other cloud services. Or I can just go to Microsoft, again, focusing on Azure, and say, hey, I need a database. And it's going to say, then Microsoft's going to say, hey, cool, what do you need? Do you need SQL Server? Do you need a NoSQL solution like Cosmos database? Do you just need some raw table storage? What do you need? We're already running it for you. All you need to do is upload your data into it. So you get efficiencies from the cloud service provider actually giving you the infrastructure that you need, but you still have the flexibility to do it yourself by creating virtual machines and then implementing the services yourself. but you also have to get connected to it. Now, sometimes the terminology they use is a little bit over bright. I like to think of it as you're connecting over the internet. Well, when you're connecting to a cloud service provider, all of your connections by default are going to be protected with, TLS, HTTPS connections. If you create services, you have the choice to not use HTTPS, but of course, that's just crazy talk to do that. But if you implement your own services, for instance, in Azure, if you create a virtual network and you're running virtual machines in that virtual network, how are your users going to connect to it? Well, you can get public IP addresses and connect to those services just like you would a public IP address that was running in your own data center. Oh, by the way, when was the last time you tried to obtain a public IP address, particularly an IPv4? You can rent them from Microsoft or AWS or Google, or in a lot of cases, you don't even need an IP address, a public IP address. You can use Microsoft's DNS services and Microsoft provides access to their own resources. Maybe you don't need a public IP address. What you really need is a public endpoint that's provided by Microsoft. But if you need a public IP address, hey, you can go rent them. They've got them. They've got lots of them, and now, of course, you're end up paying for it. Whereas with the DNS endpoint, for the most part, you're paying for the service, not for that endpoint. But you can have an endpoint. But how do you connect to virtual networks? Well, you have a choice there. There's VPN connectivity, but you also have a private connection that in Microsoft's case, they call ExpressRoute. Now, actually, to kind of demonstrate some of what's here, here's a link that I'm going to go ahead and just put into the chat so that you have it. And it will be on the recording also. But you can actually get here by just going to azure.microsoft.com. On this page, where Microsoft is advertising their services to you, if you go to products, and then if we scroll down, you'll see they actually have a section here on the products that are most commonly used in hybrid and multi-cloud, things like Azure Arc, which I mentioned already. And this would give you a description of Azure Arc and lead you to the documentation for it. But you'll notice, well, it does have ExpressRoute. So I just mentioned ExpressRoute as being a private connection between you or between a local ISP and Microsoft, where your connectivity doesn't even go across the regular internet. But if I scroll on down a little bit lower here, we also have a link to networking information. Now, here's ExpressRoute again, because it's used not just in hybrid environments, although primarily that's what we would use. But we also see VPN gateway. You can create traditional VPN connections that use IPsec and IKE as the encryption technology. You can even allow individuals. So if you've got people working from home, they can connect directly to this VPN gateway. Or you can create virtual WAN connectivity to where your multiple VPN connections and possibly ExpressRoute connections can be shared and actually give you connectivity between your on-premises remote offices, including remote workers, all through a high-level encryption, IPsec with IKE version 2. For individual connections, you can actually go all the way down to SSTP if you need to, but IKE version 2 is the preferred protocol for connecting. So you've got the advantage of a large business, could be Microsoft, could be Amazon, could be Google, who's been in the IT game for 1 billion years. They know what it takes to do things, and they're providing you basically on a platter ways to implement all of those features internally, or if you need to, do it yourself using virtual machines. Cost savings. If we look at the um, actually, again, Microsoft has some some websites that are actually dedicated to some of this information. For instance, here's another link just to throw this out at you. The economics of cloud computing. They've got some information uh, on cost optimization built into. Now that link leads us here to this page where they actually have information about other companies, how they've actually saved money in the cloud, some of the other features that are available. But one of the things that Microsoft has that people might not be keenly aware of, we have the Azure pricing calculator, where you can go in and figure out exactly what it's going to cost you to implement something. Part of that hybrid decision is, what is it going to cost me? Well, if you're running services in your own data center, you should have a good handle on what it's actually costing you. What would it cost to implement that same thing in the cloud? The Azure pricing calculator lets you go in and figure on the size of whatever the service is, virtual machines or an app service or a database service, how much activity it's generating. You have to know that to get an accurate estimate. And they will give you an accurate estimate of how much it's going to cost you and show you some of the cost savings that you might be able to implement. But just at a basic level, I mean, think about it. When you go buy servers for your data center, for me, I was buying, five or if I got lucky, I might buy 10 servers all at once. The discount that I get would be like 0%. Microsoft is buying, whole production runs at a time. So their cost of their equipment, of their hardware, is significantly less than the cost that you could ever hope to get. I would think their cost of maintaining all of those services is going to be less because it's spread across a very large number of hardware. So the cost savings that Microsoft has, also, they tend to put their data centers, and again, the other providers do similarly. They tend to put their data centers where there's relatively inexpensive renewable power available. For instance, Microsoft's regional data center that they call West US 2 is located in Quincy, Washington State. It's about a stone's throw from a large dam on the Columbia River that generates power. And they just buy that power in bulk. Relatively cheap, clean energy. In other places, they make sure they locate around wind farms, for instance. So cost savings, their cost of running things is significantly less in all likelihood than what you're running. Although there may be some cases where you have a really large database that would be somewhat cost prohibitive. Once again, there's where the hybrid comes in. If something is going to cost a lot, keep it in-house, run what you can in the cloud and take advantage of what you need. Now, the connectivity can be through the express route, the VPN connection, but also there are other types of connectivity. Service bus, which is it's not technically a queuing service, but basically it is. That's designed to queue information up that's being transferred from on-premises up to web services in the cloud or back down again. So they have built-in features for doing that. Now, one of the other things, the pricing calculator lets you figure out exactly what it's going to cost you to run something if you've got all of the information about exactly what sort of activity it's going to. Uh-oh. Doggone it. I just accidentally overwrote something. All right. Exactly what it's going to cost you. But they also have a total cost of ownership calculator where you can go in and list what it is that you're doing right now in your own data center and compare it generally to the cost that what it's going to cost you to run it in the cloud, and look and see if there are going to be some savings there. And you can adjust the assumptions that they make in there. What's your labor cost? What's your electricity cost? What's your cooling cost? See, down here in New Orleans, of course, we have tons and tons of cooling that we have to pay for everything. Agility, Microsoft, and again, the other cloud providers have tons and tons of excess capacity. They have to be able to satisfy somebody's need. If they come in and say, I need 1,000 virtual machines, Microsoft says, sure, what size would you like? So the ability to create new services or implement larger services on the fly, being able to come in and say, I don't have to buy and then wait for and then install and set up a bunch of servers to try something new out. I can simply go into Azure. And in fact, when it comes to cost savings, you can sign up for Azure. And again, for the others also, you can sign up for Azure for free, get a $200 credit that's good over 30 days. And there's a bunch of resources that are just always free. For instance, if I've got a developer who's working on a new website, they can set up, even in a regular paid subscription, you can set up a free web server using the app service. Try it out, see how it works, fine tune it in the cloud, and end up not having to pay anything for it. Or if I need to use something that doesn't have a free version of it, I could sign up for the free account. I've got 30 days to try things out. But it's there, it's waiting for you. And in fact, if I need to do things like a database, I don't have to set up the SQL server. I can just say, hey, I need a SQL database, or I need a Cosmos database, or I need a Maria database. All of those are available. Scalability. Now, not every service inside of the clouds are scalable, but a lot of them are, particularly things that have traditionally been or had scaling available to it. If you have a virtual machine that has an application that's scalable, you can set up in Azure a virtual machine scale set. And then you set the rules that determine when additional nodes get added to it or get removed from it. You can use Kubernetes if you're using containers. Azure has full support for Kubernetes. In fact, if you're in a multi-cloud, setting up Kubernetes makes the most sense because you could spin up a cluster in Azure or spin up the same cluster in AWS or in Google Cloud. And if you're using Azure Arc, you can actually all control it from one location. So you could have, I mean, literally, people will do this. If there's a cheaper price in AWS for a couple of months, just run your Kubernetes cluster over there. If it gets cheaper in Azure because Microsoft's made some changes, just go ahead and spin up those containers over here. Virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters, app service. If you have a web-based service that you need to run, then the app service is scalable built in. But you don't have to go buy all of the servers. If you're trying to do scalability inside your own data center, you have to have all of that excess capacity so that you can scale up or scale out, whereas the cloud service providers have all of that excess capacity. In fact, that's one of the cost savings you have with virtual machines. Microsoft has so many spare virtual machines that they need to keep spare and available for scaling, that they let you pay a really cheap price if you are okay with Microsoft evicting your virtual machine in case somebody needs to scale and take up that space. So, but it's a great way to save money on it. So if you've got a service that needs to scale, if you've got a service that needs a large number of CPU cores that you don't currently have, Microsoft and AWS and Google all have tons and tons of excess capacity that they'd be happy to sell you or utilize. And maybe there's some features that you couldn't do before. Maybe there's some performance level that you could never obtain in your own data center. Now the data centers in the cloud aren't infinite, but again, for me as a small business person, they look pretty infinite to me compared to what I could do in my own data center. So you can take advantage of all that excess power. And, of course, the big thing these days is AI, AI, AI. We're hearing it everywhere. A lot of that requires a ton of processing power, maybe more than you can field in your own data center. Oh, by the way, here's another idea. If I take my current data center and I shift a bunch of resources up into the cloud because it's cheaper or more efficient to run them there, I now have some excess capacity in my own data center. Maybe I can use it to do some analysis that I couldn't do before. Or I can implement the analysis in that, again, essentially from my standpoint, infinite power that's available in the cloud. So the AI services that are available in Azure and of course the other clouds, machine learning, IoT, if you're doing a bunch of IoT processing, if as long as the device has access to the cloud, Microsoft has a bunch of IoT services that you could use. With the multi-cloud, you're not tied to just Microsoft. You can shift between Microsoft, AWS, and Google fairly easily, and there are other providers out there also. Again, there may be products like Azure Arc that allow you to easily manage services no matter where they are. By the way, when it comes to flexibility and manageability, if you're running virtualized services in-house, Microsoft has what they call Azure Stack. Azure Stack lets you run Azure technology in your own data center. That way, if you want to work on things internally, you are creating objects that are basically exactly the same as you would create in Azure, and so you can more easily migrate them up into Azure. Not just utilizing things like Azure Stack. Microsoft has the web adoption framework. a set of guidelines that's not just from Microsoft, it's from everybody. All of the big cloud players have gotten together and created frameworks to make it easy for you to migrate. And then they have the well-architected framework in Azure, which gives you an idea of how to best implement services inside of Azure. Better security. Now, the first time I see this, every time I always go, are you kidding me? You're putting stuff on the internet and you're claiming that that's better security? Well, it is if you're watching it better. So for instance, with Azure, we have Defender for Cloud, which lets you watch on-premises servers. It lets you watch and manage and maintain security in all of Azure, but it also can include AWS and Google Cloud. You've got Microsoft Sentinel, which is, one of its big features was it introduced basically an umbrella security system on top of, for instance, Defender for Cloud, where you could pull in information using multiple connectors from lots and lots of services and have one place where you could get an overall view of your security. Most of security is watching for problems to happen. And cloud solutions gives you access to tools that would be cost prohibitive to buy for yourself. They're not free. Actually, some of them are free up in the cloud, but they're implemented in the cloud and they can extend to multi-cloud and to your on-premises environment. Reduced downtime. Let me tell you, I grew up in New Orleans and in the New Orleans area. I was here during Katrina. Well, I wasn't right here. I was out of town when that happened. But I was living in the fallout of Katrina, running around. I can remember running around and setting up servers in people's living rooms, trying to recover their business services. Boy, we really wished that we'd had site recovery, which is a feature inside of Azure, where you can have replication of physical machines, virtual machines constantly being made either into Azure or into a remote site of your own choosing, and then command a failover where those replicated machines start up. They already have their network set up. They're basically up and running in minutes instead of having to build new machines. One of the problems we had here in New Orleans, we couldn't get to our backup tapes. They were trapped in the middle of downtown. They weren't flooded where they were, but around downtown was all flooded. And of course, we had the army had moved in and was keeping everybody out. So we couldn't even get to our backup tapes. Wouldn't it be better to have my backups up in the cloud where I could get to it anywhere around the world? But within the clouds themselves, all of their services are automatically redundant. The hardware is redundant. That's on the cloud provider. But the services that I set up, I can choose redundant versions of those services so that if there's a failure, it immediately switches over to another copy. Or if I'm running like a virtual machine scale set, it just scales out a little bit more. Compliance features. Governance and compliance is a big concern of Microsoft and the other cloud providers. One of the things that you get is in Defender for Cloud, there's over 90 compliance standards that you can automatically judge your systems against. There's the Microsoft Purview site, which is built for compliance. There's the compliance manager where you can keep track of all your compliance audits. There's the I almost said software assurance. Oh shoot, and software assurance got in my brain there, and so now I can't get it out. The security assurance site from Microsoft, which lists all of their audits of their information. I mean, the benefits of having a huge multi-billion-dollar company, Microsoft, AWS, Google Cloud, bankrolling a system that you can just walk in and take advantage of is a huge, huge advantage. All right. In addition to the links that I put in there, there's that the handout which has some links. If you want to learn more, of course, New Horizons, we've got Google Cloud Platform training courses. We've got AWS training courses. I would recommend if a lot of this sounds relatively new to you, all of the where's the Azure? I guess that was the Azure. Oh, there it is. Azure training courses. All three of these have a fundamentals course that goes over why you would choose Azure or AWS or Google Cloud. What are the options that are available in there? The fundamentals courses tend to be a bit cheaper than the administrator level courses, and they're trying to introduce. Yes, and the recording will be available to you also. All right. Well, time's up, just about up. Any other questions that we can tackle there for you?
Hey, Eric, I'll give our audience like 30 more seconds to throw any last minute things in there. But yep, just to answer that question, we will be sending you a recording in an email, so be on the lookout for that one. And if you missed out on any part of this session, we'll follow up with you on some of these foundational classes. And again, if you need any more information on this topic, please do not be afraid to visit us at newhorizons.com. Looks like we got a lot of thank you and great presentations, Eric. So I think that'll be it for here. So
All righty.
thanks everyone for joining us. Yes, the links will be in the email, Dominic. Perfect. Yes, absolutely. But yeah, again, thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Absolutely. See y'all later. Bye.